Hello and welcome to State Scoop's Priorities Podcast. I'm Colin Woods, State Scoop's Editor-in-Chief. This week we're talking about AI and evidence-based policymaking. But first, here's what's happening. The Rockefeller Foundation and the nonprofit Center for Civic Futures on Tuesday unveiled a new effort called the AI Readiness Project, aimed at preparing state governments to use artificial intelligence tools to improve how they administer services to the public. The Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University is also ramping up its efforts to support AI work in state and local governments. Andrew Merluzzi, who's serving as its new AI Innovation and Incubation Fellow, said he thinks the recent years of groundwork that states have done are beginning to finally bear fruit. The Federal Communications Commission last week voted to approve an order that will roll back caps on phone and video calls to and from prisons and jails. Some rates are expected to as much as double. We have two interviews this week. One is with Patrick Carter, Vice President of State Practice at Results for America, who reviews some of his organization's work on promoting evidence-based policymaking. You'll hear more about that later. First, State Scoop's Keely Quinlan interviews Robert Fulk, the Chief Information Officer for the Indiana Secretary of State's Office, about a new learning program for state notaries that was created with AI.
Well, we've had it for years, but there were it got to be there were a lot of complaints. It was outdated instructional design. People just weren't happy with it. It was very long, repetitive. There's a lot of recurring training that was due, remedial, yearly, biannually, and a lot of it was just repeated, and it was very long. It wasn't accessible. It didn't meet the new kind of micro content, micro learning, that people expect. Everyone wants stuff in nuggets now. And it wasn't accessible, it didn't meet accessibility standards, as well as usability. So there were just a lot of issues with it. And the other side, it was also really clunky because there was a lot of, integration with like 3 or 4 different systems and other vendors, and would break all the time. And we were just having a lot of issues. So we needed to modernize it. It was drastically needed.
Yeah. So you guys basically rebuilt it then. Talk a little bit about what the development of it looked like. And it's my understanding that there were like a lot of players involved.
Yeah. We partnered. Well, there's one main vendor partner, one of our strategic partners, Venturet, that kind of is a boutique IT firm that really does some leading edge, cutting edge systems. And they've done a lot of learning and learning content management and other systems. So they had a lot of expertise in this. They have on staff instructional designers and PhDs and, in adult learning theory and taxonomy. So we wanted to also address and meet the needs of the learners, to help them learn, inspire, couple that with a modernized technical architecture and system and a good delivery method. So, and then we partnered with Google to deliver the platform and their AI we used. We already have been using them in some of our other projects. And, we have a kind of a bulk rate contract. That's one of the reasons we went with them. We partner with AWS and others as well, Microsoft. But on this project, we're using the Google's AI, Vertex AI, Gemini, and some other really neat tools to develop content as well using AI.
Yeah. So, following after that, it's my, understanding too that in lieu of, say hiring like a content team or outsourcing it maybe, you guys did use AI for a lot of like the content generation for like the system and the courses and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about why that was the decision and the route that y'all took, as opposed to say some other options?
Yeah. Well, we're kind of future innovation leaning, as we talked about before, a lot of the projects we're doing, and we're really embracing AI in a, governance and protected way, secure way. But, the two big things were time and cost. We're able to get things done, very quickly, and we're leveraging AI to generate a lot of the content, review the content that the instructional designers are creating. And then, of course, the humans in the loop, the instructional designers reviewing it. But then we're also using it to generate audio, actual scripted, like interview type of audio. The way we did this in here, it's not just a flat something reading something. It's actually 2 really energetic people that are talking about the content and almost being interviewed throughout the content. So it's really engaging for the learners. And we even used it to generate video. So it's to generate the instructional content, the audio, and video throughout the course, coupled with a virtual instructor that kind of follows you all the way throughout the course, and the AI adapts the course to the learner.
Wow, that's really interesting. I guess one of the things I have a question about too is like, especially with regards to AI, right? How do you envision balancing like this need for innovation, right? That you're talking about, like with speed and being able to experiment a little bit with being and producing a product that's reliable, secure, um, and especially when it comes down to government work, right? Like there's an element of transparency that needs to occur. So like how are you thinking about those two in conversation, especially with
Yeah.
regard to this project?
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of it, they followed, there's a lot of standards we had to follow, and we did a secure first by design, built into the product from the beginning. We involved our partners, Indiana Office of Technology, reviewing everything. We have a Michigan Performance Hub that reviews all AI products. So all this has already been approved for our governance, our infrastructure, our security, and following the state and federal and government standards, as well as following CIS and NIST frameworks. So we're secure by design up front, and everything was reviewed in the beginning, because governance, security, and control are extremely important to everyone, but especially government. So, that's the foundation. All this was already set. And how I balance that is, we really, I'd almost say once that's in place, driving innovation and leveraging new technologies is actually easier to do once you have those things done. And rather than following a traditional framework, we are really, following a hybrid, project management approach where we're developing these things, in 3 to 6 months, 9-month timeframes, complete modernized projects, bringing vendors in and giving them the freedom to do it once we have those frameworks in place, really to innovate and drive technology. But again, we had to clear those things up front, have a secure environment that's been approved, have a secure AI and our own models that are not public, and are sharing data with the public models out there. They're kept private for the government and our own tenants, in Google and even AWS we use as well. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, that timeline sounds like light years in terms of government work, right?
yeah,
It's rather
yeah,
fast. So as far as like lessons learned from this project, right? Are there any items that came across? Were there challenges that you were able to learn from that maybe you'll carry, with you into say the next project? Or are there any like major takeaways that you think folks that are listening might benefit from?
yeah. Some of it was the integration points. We should have involved those other some of our other agencies and data sharing integrations. We did a little sooner. We kind of did it, we're like, oh, it's going to be no big deal. And we waited till about, a month before we were launching, and it ended up taking a few months. So it delayed the project a couple months, simply because of the complexity of doing some of these integrations with a lot of legacy systems across the state and multiple agencies and vendors and priorities and timing. So that was one thing we should have done from day one, schedule those out a little better, because those, and the data transfer, we had to move a lot of data and things out of the, into the system, out of the state. One of the other big pieces of it, and this kind of leads into where we're going the next phase of this, which is even neater, is we're pulling in the licensing piece. So right now it's the training and learning and adaptive piece, using AI. Step 2, it's in development now. Phase 2 of this is doing all the licensing and certification. So AI is actually going to read everything, the entire submittals from applicants for notaries that have to go through bond checks, documents, criminal histories, all this other stuff. AI is going to read it, interpret it, make determinations, and actually do the recommendation that they should be approved for their licensing and certification, which is a huge step. Now we will have human in the loop at the end. We're building in. So the human can review all that, click the final button and approve it or override stuff. But AI it's going to improve the process because it's going to push back on them. And actually tell the applicant, hey, there's a problem here with your signature. There's a problem with your bond certificate. There's some other things you're not going to do. And we don't even have to do that. It takes all that burden off the staff. So they can do the higher value customer service experiences, versus manual data entry and feedback and communication. That's all being automated through AI. But the challenge to that was we didn't build that piece up front into this. So what we did is we complicated that. Like I said, we had this disjointed systems and processes, and all we did was replace the old vendor's disjointed system, and we still had to integrate with 3 or 4 other systems. And there's a lot of complication, passing data back and forth between 4 systems on a real-time basis. So I looking backwards, I would have done the licensing piece at the same time, not separate.
Gotcha. So you hear that, y'all? Licensing first.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap this up, after this project, right? And then earlier this year, you guys executed on Captain Record, which is a really cool AI tool that you guys developed as well. And we spoke about that earlier this year. What's
Yep.
next? What's coming up next? Can you share any
Mhm.
teasers,
Yeah.
basically?
Well, the neat thing is this notary, the phase 2 of it that's in development, it'll be done by January that I mentioned, is going to using AI to actually do licensing and certifications, which the state does everywhere, across all agencies in the federal government. But using AI to dramatically automate that process, that's huge. It's going to lay a foundation. And with us doing that, we're actually have 3 other enterprise systems being built cloud native right now, getting completely rebuilt from the ground up on AWS. But we're going to be building in AI, agentic AI, into those processes, having agents throughout the process, micro agents to help people throughout registrations and business registrations and our auto dealers and other areas. But we're also going to build a agentic AI again to review documents, input data, do all this automated to get, to reduce the workload on the human beings so they can really focus on the higher level things, the kickbacks that AI says put into queue. And we're doing that across 3 enterprise systems. Build an AI completely into the processes, agentic AIs, where they're going to review stuff, approve it, actually communicate back with the applicants, and just take the human beings, reduce their workload, And again, humans are always in the loop, the state for final approval. We're not taking them out of the loop, but it's reducing their workload. So now what they're doing is reviewing things versus doing manual entries, manual review, and, they're just reviewing the recommendations from the AI agents.
That was Robert Fulk, CIO at the Indiana Secretary of State. Next, here's Patrick Carter, Vice President of State Practice at Results for America, who explains why he thinks evidence-based practices in government are taking off.
Right now, in lots of ways, the alternative to evidence-based decision-making is the status quo. We're seeing that now based off of our research and reviews. Only just over 1% of government dollars at the federal, state, and local levels go towards something with a track record of success. And so in many ways, the 99% of dollars right now are used in ways that we don't know what the outcome is or what the effectiveness is. And so we see that alternative right now, but there is a better way. There's 13 states that we recently certified through the State Center of Excellence that are showing us what good government looks like in terms of using data and evidence to improve outcomes for their residents.
Right. And data-driven decision-making is a term that we've heard for a long time, a decade or maybe 2 at this point. What are you seeing as the main impediments to what sounds like a pretty common sense project of not just guessing when it comes to developing policy?
Yes, absolutely. There's a big tent, if you will, for kind of what counts as data-driven decision making. I'd say there's 2 things that are happening now. One, we've learned lots of lessons from governments over the last 10 to 20 years about how to do this and what works. And for example, Results for America released a report last year on kind of the 5 elements of evidence-based budgeting based off of examples from a dozen or so states to help make that really concrete. You could count a lot of things as data-driven decision making, but through our experience, it's been very helpful to have 5 concrete steps to help government decision makers kind of see what they need to do next or what they could do next, have a example template from another state to help them do more in that space. These aren't new ideas to your point, but we're seeing them applied in different contexts. Lots of states took up evidence-based policymaking coming out of the Great Recession when budgets were tight, and they figured out that they needed to make tough decisions, and using evidence of effectiveness was a good way to do that. But for the last few years, those states that have adopted evidence-based budgeting haven't had to use them in tough budget times for the most part. States have been well situated. But over the last year or so, many states are kind of needing to put their evidence-based budgeting muscles to the test. And we're seeing what that looks like right now. More states than ever are using evidence to inform their budgets and their grant making. And so it's promising. The future is promising for what these states could be doing in these tough budget situations.
That's right. Yep. Revenues are declining coming out of the pandemic, and some states have really big budget shortfalls. Not all, but the environment for putting some of this stuff to the test is certainly right. It seems like so. What are some good examples that you're seeing, either states that Results for America has worked with, or otherwise? What do you like to point at?
Yeah, I'll maybe highlight 4 states briefly. So Minnesota, Tennessee, and Colorado, they recently earned platinum certification on our 2025 Invest in What Works State Center of Excellence. They've been doing this work for a long time, a decade plus, and so they have the muscle memory. It's ingrained in how senior leaders, legislators, civil servants make decisions, how they build budgets, how they let grants. But most exciting, there's new states that have just recently said we want to be with Minnesota, Tennessee, and Colorado, and Maryland is a great example that over the course of maybe the last year and a half, they have gone from doing zero evidence-based budgeting to earning gold certification on our State Center of Excellence. They've adopted 2 evidence-based budgeting criteria and have plans to adopt the remaining 3. There's numerous grant programs that in the state of Maryland that now incorporate evidence either as preference points or requirements that will either require or encourage those grantees to use the best available information and research when they're implementing programs under those grants. So a real success story in Maryland for what it looks like to do this work quickly. They're standing on the shoulders of other bipartisan states that have done this, and really hopefully making a difference for people living in that state because of the changes that the administration has made.
Right. I think it's worth asking, the definition is sort of in the name of it, but can you maybe describe what evidence-based decision-making looks like?
Yes, this is actually step 1 of evidence-based budgeting and evidence-based grant making is defining what you mean by evidence. If there's one takeaway that I could give to your listeners and government decision makers is define what you mean by evidence in your legislation, in your grant programs, in your policy manuals, in your budget documents, because that could mean a lot of things. You and I might have different definitions of when we see the word evidence-based, and so we encourage every decision maker to have some definition. It could be a threshold, kind of anything above this line is evidence-based. It could be a tiered definition like the state of Tennessee uses. But it gives decision makers common language so that if you say this is a tier 3 evidence on Tennessee's evidence definition, I know what that means, and we can have a more informed conversation about whether that's good, whether that's good enough for the decisions that we're making. But more broadly, I mentioned the 5 steps of evidence-based budgeting. Defining evidence is first one, and then systematically collecting the information. So this means changing forms, templates, budget instructions, so that evidence information is collected and compiled in a systematic way, again with an eye towards informing decision making. Step 3 is setting targets. So a handful of states do this. They say X% of proposals for the governor's budget should be evidence-based, or a certain number per agency would need to be evidence-based. And then the last two are about informing decision makers with information. And so reporting on evidence information during the decision-making process, so that decision makers have evidence at the table, along with other sets of information when they're making their decisions. And then finally, step 5 is reporting out after legislation is enacted, so that there's kind of a public record of what was evidence-based, and you can go back and check on that to see how those programs are doing, potential opportunities for evaluation, things like that.
Nice. That's great. Thanks for that definition. When I think of evidence, I usually think of a crime scene. So hopefully we're not talking of something so grisly in these cases. So I think maybe the last question, can you summarize what Results for America does? You alluded to the certification program. Just tell us a little bit more about what your group does around promoting this.
Yes, Results for America is a national bipartisan nonprofit that is focused on supporting public officials at all levels of government to make better, smarter use of data and evidence in their policy making and budgeting decisions. We provide no-cost technical assistance to governments to help them do this work better. We are also unique in that we don't take any public funding. We're supported by philanthropies, so that we can work with government without kind of having a stake in kind of the funding outcome decisions that they make. And then finally, I talked about our What Works certification. So this is an annual, essentially a survey of state governments to see how they're using data and evidence in their decision making, and celebrating those examples from across the country. We have examples from 48 states in this year's State Standard of Excellence, and we certified 13 states, the most ever, who scored high enough on our 12 criteria. I mentioned a couple of the states already, but Minnesota, Tennessee, and Colorado earned platinum certification. Maryland, North Carolina, and Rhode Island earned gold certification on this year's State Standard of Excellence.
That was Patrick Carter with Results for America. That's it for this episode. You can subscribe to the Priorities Podcast at prioritiespodcast.com. This recording is a production of Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher helped put it together. I'm Colin Wood. Thanks for listening.